أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. We have now reached chapter 6 in the Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times by René Guénon. This is a relatively short chapter. I think it's only about 3 pages, but it is, I would say, not only very important, but I think it's a kind of intense chapter. And I think that if you don't understand the background in the logic of Aristotle, traditional logic that is behind or that is assumed in this chapter, you will miss quite a lot. So let's just jump right in. The title of this chapter is The Principle of Individuation. The Principle of Individuation. In other words, what is it that distinguishes objects or members of a species from one another? In other words, the key question of this chapter that Guénon wants to deal with is, what is the relation of individuals to species? So, in the previous chapters, Guénon already dealt at length with space and time. And here, obviously, as the title indicates, he's turning to the principle of individuation, but it's really the principle of, individuation in reference to matter. That he is looking at this. Now, in scholastic thought, materia, which we've already met, we talked about materia prima and materia secunda in scholastic thought in the previous lectures. So in scholastic thought, materia is considered to be the principle of individuation. And Guénon wishes to subject this view to closer scrutiny, to careful examination in this chapter. So once again, the key question is, what is the relation of individuals to species? So on the very first page of this chapter, which is page 45, he says that the scholastics looked on materia as constituting the principium individuationis, or the principium individuationis. In other words, the principle of individuation. What was their reason for looking at things in that way, and how far was it justified? All right, so he's posing the question. He continues, in order to understand what is involved in this question, it is sufficient without in any way going beyond the limits of our world. Then there's a parenthetical. Let's read it without that. So let's start again. In order to understand what is involved in this question, it is sufficient without in any way going beyond the limits of our world to envisage the relation of individuals to species. In this relation, species is on the side of form or essence, and individuals, or more exactly, that which distinguishes individuals of the same species, one from another, are on the side of matter or substance. So it's important that you remember that there are a number of terms that are associated with the basic heading or rubric of essence, and a number of other terms which are associated with substance. We've said this many times, but if you don't keep this in your mind while reading Guénon, you will get lost. So under essence, we have form, quality, purusha, unity, the Pythagorean numbers, Platonic ideas. All of these are also essences, mental phenomenon, name, intelligibles, noetic realities, etc. And then under substance, you have matter, of course, which is materia, hule, not to be confused with ousia, and quantity, not to be confused with poson, etc. So we've gone over these things before. Here you just have to understand that what he is going to say in due course is that species is associated with form or essence. And remember that the term for species that was used, I think, is eidon or eidos, and that individuals of a species will be associated with substance. So let's go further with this. Just by way of a quick review, you have to understand that he's talking about species, and species is one of the 5 predicables. So if we refer back to some logic textbooks, this one is pretty useful for our purposes. This is called Logic, the Art of Defining and Reasoning by Oesterle. I'm not sure how that's pronounced. John A. Oesterle, I suppose. So on page 13 of this book, which was published Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, Prentice Hall, 1952. It's a very good logic book. He says on page 13 that you have genus, species, specific difference, property. Property is also known as proprium, and then accident, which is also known as common accident. So in Arabic, it's al-jins wal-naw' wal al-fasl, and then property was al-khassa, and accident is al-arad al-am. So these are the 5 predicables. Genus. Genus is the universal. So again, these 5 predicables are also, they're all universals. They're also known in Arabic as al-kulliyatul khamsa, which means the 5 universals. Genus is the universal that can be said of many that differ specifically. It answers the question, what is it? However, the predicable genus answers this question incompletely, because the genus expresses only part of the essence or nature. An example. Animal is a genus when said of man and dog. It expresses only part of the essence of man or dog. Now let's look at species, and this is what the focus is in this chapter. Species is the universal said of many that differ in number. Now this is very important, but you have to understand that species is not a mere conglomeration or collectivity. Although number is involved, it is not to be understood in this way. Why? Let's see what he says further here. He says, it also answers the question, what is it? But the predicable species answers this question completely, so it's distinguished from the genus. That is to say, it expresses the whole essence. So that's the key point, that species expresses the whole essence, and therefore it should not be construed merely quantitatively. And I'm sort of getting ahead of again on, but that's what the moderns do. They reduce species also to a quantity. For example, man is a species when said of Paul or James or John. Then you have specific difference. This is the universal said of many that differ in number and also in species. It answers the question of what quality is the essence. It distinguishes one species from another within the same genus. Thus, if we ask of what quality man's essence is, to distinguish man from any other species in the genus of animal, we answer rational, because of course the human being is distinguished by the rational soul. And by this we designate the specific difference. So among the 5 predicables, these 3 are considered to be of a universal nature, because there is a universal sort of connection, and it is an essential connection. The next 2 are considered to be accidental kinds of connection, so to speak. And they are property, which in some older books is known as the proprium. Property is the universal said of a species as that which belongs only, necessarily, and always to the species and to every individual of that species. A property is convertible or interchangeable with the species of which it is a property. These are all very classic examples in logic. So in logic books, they always say that man is a rational animal.
Mm-hmm.
That's the definition. Al-insanu haywanun natiq in Arabic logic books. And so to give for example of the property, they'll say grammatical. So they'll say, for example, grammatical is said of man as a property. Okay, fine. Then there's accident or common accident. Accident is the universal set of a species as that which belongs contingently to that species and to the individuals of that species. An accident is a characteristic that can come to be or disappear without destruction of the species in question in which it is found. For example, white is said of a man as an accident. The color white does not necessarily characterize man, nor is it found always in man, nor does it belong only to man. So I think other examples they give are like laughing, writing, and so forth. So these are the 5 predicables. And in terms of levels of generality, again, if we stick to our example of man, the rational animal, you have a kind of range of generality. So you have the ultimate genus, or genus summum in Latin, which is substantia or substance. And then you have differentia. So you can say that you've got substance, then it's either corpora or incorporea. These are Latin terms. And then you have its differentia, further differentia are, animatum or inanimatum, it's animate or inanimate, vivens, it's living, sensibile, insensibile, animal, rationale, irrationale, and then you finally get to the species infima or the infima species, which is homo, man. In English, there's the logic as a liberal art. That example had everything in Latin, but just you have substance at the very apex. And then substance is either body or spirit. Body is either animate, that is to say a living thing, or inanimate, a non-living body. And spirit, they usually would say it would be God, the one. God is considered spirit, apparently. And then you have created spirits. And then under animate body, living things, you have animal, and you have plant. Under animal, you're going to have rational animal, irrational animal. Then under rational animal, you have man, and then you have non-human rational animals, I suppose jinn. And then when you hit man, you can't go any further in terms of, then you are struck with particulars. You have the individual man Plato, you have the individual man Socrates, you have the individual man in the sense of human, that's what the word originally meant, Hypatia, Xanthippe. And these are ancient Greek names, right? Xanthippe is Greek. Yeah. Or you have Bob and Alice, John and Jane, etc. So that is the lowest that you can go there when you hit the species at the very bottom, right? Mm-hmm. And so the question that's being asked is that when you have such a species, let's say you have a species of, let's say cows, and you have a whole herd of cows. What is it that distinguishes one cow from another? What is the principle of individuation? That's what's at stake here. And what we'll see when we proceed with Genon's, with the text that of the reign of quantity, you'll see that for modern people it is number or quantity which is the principle of individuation, and it should not be. And Genon will say no, it should actually be form. So I've already spelled it out for you, but now let's see how he actually does it in the book. So
doesn't Proclus also deal with this problem of the manifold unity or something like that? I think in his own version.
Proclus?
I can't remember if it was Proclus, but there was some Greek philosopher who had his own version of Euclid's Elements, but it was to prove theological arguments.
Right. That's called the Elements of Theology.
The Elements
by Proclus,
of Theology.
And at the very beginning, because we're talking about Platonists,
yeah.
He's talking about the one,
mm-hmm.
which is unique. But then he says that all things partake of the one, including even manifold entities, because a given manifold entity can be conceived under some principle of unification as a unified thing.
And then he says that the one is a kind of manifold unity. I think those are his words.
Well, we'd have to go back and check, but if he means that all multiplicity is synthetically included in the utterly simple one. Yeah, that's probably right. I think that comes up in the next chapter, in fact, and get on in chapter 7. Yeah. But let's not get ahead of it. So there is a footnote here to the section which we just read, where he's arguing that, remember he said that species is on the side of form or essence, and individuals, or more exactly that which distinguishes individuals of the same species one from another, are on the side of matter or substance. Then there's a footnote, and I don't want to neglect any part of the text. So I'm being thorough. So this footnote, we should really read it. It says, it should be pointed out that there is a difficulty in this connection. In which connection? Connection of form being associated with species and matter being associated with substance. Okay, at least in appearance. Now this is an interesting point. In the hierarchy of kinds, if one considers the relation of one particular kind to a second less general kind, which is as it were a species in relation to the first plays the part of matter and the second the part of form. Thus at first sight the relation appears to apply in a reverse direction. So in other words, if we just start at the level of greater generality, and let's just take the part where it says animal. Animal, strictly speaking, is the genus and is more general, and then man is the less general and is the species, or human being, if you like. So for Genon, he would say that animal in this case, the more general, corresponds to matter, and the less general corresponds to form, and you would think it would go the other way around. But he's saying it isn't like that. If one considers the relation of one particular kind to a second less general kind, which is as it were a species in relation to the first plays the part of matter, and the second the part of form. Thus at first sight the relation appears to apply in a reverse direction, though actually it is not comparable to the relation of species to individuals. Alright, so he's saying that relationship in our example of animal to species is not the same as the relation of species to individuals. Moreover, it is envisaged from a purely logical point of view. So we're talking logic here. So in the sense that man would be the form, would correspond to form, and animal would correspond to matter, we're speaking from a purely logical point of view. By which he means as if, and I'm quoting here, as if it were a relation of a subject to an attribute. Sorry, I garbled it. As if it were the relation of a subject and an attribute. What he means, though, is the relation of subject to predicate. Because that's what, or logical subject to logical predicate. The subject corresponding to the designation of the kind and the attribute to that of the specific difference. Right, so that's just one clarification of the footnote. And now he engages in a lot of clarifications before really getting to the point at the end of the chapter. He further notes that there is nothing surprising in this observation, namely in his observation that species is on the side of form or essence, and that the principle of individuation that distinguishes individuals of the same species from one another is on the side of matter or substance. He says that there's nothing surprising about this correspondence, bearing in mind what has been said above about the meaning of the word eidos. So eidos is species, which is at once both form and species, and about the purely qualitative character of the latter. The qualitative character of what? Of species. Remember, the species expresses the whole essence, so it can never be construed as a mere conglomeration. It can never be construed as a mere collection of cows or whatever comes under the species, or monkeys or humans.
The species is the one.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying?
No, it expresses the whole essence. When you say that man is a rational animal, that conveys the whole essence of what it is to be a human being.
Oh, I see. But if you say that man is...
Yeah, and modern people construe species as just a conglomeration. It's very much influenced, like, I think, by the mathematics of set theory. Well, you have the set of all cows, and you have the set of all monkeys, and you have the set of... And so they're just considering, and the set of all monkeys, capital M, is equal to, you make a brace like this, like a parenthesis. Yeah. It consists of M1, M2, M3, all the way up to how many ever monkeys you have. And so they become completely quantized and atomized. He says this is not correct. The true understanding of species is that it expresses the whole essence of the thing in question.
So then what is subordinate to species?
Once you get down to species, you're done. Right?
He says species is the form and the essence, then what would be matter?
Well, we're coming to that.
Okay.
So what were we saying? We were saying that this observation is not remarkable. Namely, the observation that species is with form and the principle of individuation is on the side of matter. Now, again, I think he overemphasizes maybe a little bit here, but he returns to the notion of matter. Because you remember at the beginning of the chapter, he says that materia for the scholastics was the principle of individuation. Mm-hmm. So here he emphasizes that it's already been explained, that the word matter gives rise or can give rise to misunderstandings, just as the word form can. I'm just paraphrasing here. Because the usual meaning is quite different from that which it bears in scholastic language. So he makes it clear that in this book, he will always use the word form in the ordinary meaning, unless he is using it with particular reference to scholasticism. Okay. Now, having said that, he then says, but a question comes up. What is that question? This is about the 3/4 of a way down on page 46. Does not form, thus understood, rather than matter, or if preferred quantity, represent the true principle of individuation, since individuals are what they are by virtue of the fact that they are conditioned by form? The answer is yes. But he says that so stated, this question represents a misunderstanding of what the scholastics in fact mean when they speak of the principle of individuation. So he keeps wanting to clarify scholasticism. In no sense are the scholastics, in other words, referring to that which defines a state of existence as an individual state, for they seem never to have attained a conception quite of that order, and in any case, from this point of view, species itself must be regarded as being within the individual order, for it is in no way transcendent with regard to the state so defined. And then he gives alludes to an example from geometry, but that doesn't really matter here. He doesn't really say where. Geometric representation described elsewhere. He doesn't say where that is. On page 47, the top of the page, he says, the real question of the principle of individuation has a much more restricted range and can be reduced to this. The individuals of any one species all participate in a common nature. Remember I said species expresses the whole essence. Yeah, species expresses the whole essence. All right. The individuals of any one species all participate in a common nature, which is that of the species itself, and is in all of them equally. So that is to say that each human being embodies the full essence of being a rational creature, a rational animal. Then the question naturally becomes, how then does it come about that in spite of this community, we could say, commonality, we could say, of nature, these individuals are distinct beings, or even that they are in any way distinguishable from one another? Okay. It must be understood that individuals are now being considered only insofar as they belong to a species. So in our example, man or human being, we're only looking at them in so much as they come under
the species
of human being. Mm-hmm. Independently of anything else that may be peculiar to them under other headings. Okay, so then he says you could reword the question as follows. Of what order, he says, is the determination which is added to specific nature? so that individuals may become separate beings while remaining within the species. So specific nature, I think he means the specific difference when you say rational animal. So what is added there? It is this determination that the scholastics relate to matter. So it's just a different hunk of matter, so to speak.
Which is...
So Socrates is a man. Socrates is a rational animal. Man, right? So is Plato. So under man you have the individual Socrates, the individual Plato, the individual Aristotle.
Under matter.
Yeah, and what distinguishes them is that they are distinct. They are distinct instantiations of matter. That's for the scholastics. That is to say, ultimately, it is this determination that the scholastics relate to matter. That is to say, ultimately to quantity, according to their definition of the materia secunda of our world, and thus matter, or quantity, appears distinctly as a principle of separativity. So he doesn't really agree with this. He thinks it's really, it's that form, it should be form, but now he doesn't get into this. There are individual accidents also distinguish one member of a species from another. So in the case of human beings, some are tall, some are short. You obviously can distinguish this human being from that human being, right? By any number of characteristics. So it would be the totality of those characteristics. But here, he's saying that the scholastics say that that's actually that the principle of individuation is actually materia secunda, and he wants to make the point that when you go in that direction, matter, you're really going towards quantity. And quantity appears distinctly as a principle of separativity. So quantity is a determination added to species. Because species is form. It's just qualitative. It's exclusively qualitative, he says. And so it strictly speaking is independent of quantity. But such is not the case with individuals owing to the fact that they are incorporated. And in this connection, the greatest care must be taken to note that despite an erroneous opinion only too widespread among the moderns, species must in no way be conceived as a collectivity, as I said at the beginning. The latter being nothing but an arithmetical sum of individuals. So the human race, so to speak, the human species is more than the mere arithmetical sum. It's a very modern mathematical quantity-based kind of idea. Mm-hmm. A collectivity, says Guénon, is unlike species. It's entirely quantitative. And again, species expresses the whole essence. That's the key point. And this confusion between the general and the collective, for Guénon, is another another consequence of the tendency that leads modern people to see nothing anywhere but quantity. And this feature comes up constantly in Guénon's view. It's constantly reappearing, as he says, as a factor underlying all of the conceptions of modern people or of the modern mentality. So what is the conclusion of all this? The conclusion is this, he says, on the bottom of page, last paragraph on page 47. Quantity will predominate over quality in individuals, to the extent that they approach a condition to which they are, so to speak, mere individuals and nothing more, and to the extent that they are thereby more separate from one another, and it must be emphasized that this does not mean that they are more differentiated. For there is also a qualitative differentiation, which is properly speaking the opposite of that quantitative differentiation in which the separation in question consists. So today people are more and more homogenized. They're more and more uniform. And therefore there's less unity. Uniformity is not unity. That's the topic of chapter 7, uniformity against unity. This separation, he continues on page 48, turns individuals into so many units and turns their collectivity into quantitative multiplicity. At the limit, these individuals would be no more than something comparable to the imagined atoms. I like how he says imagined. To the imagined atoms of the physicists. deprived of every qualitative determination. And although this limit can never in fact be reached, it lies in the direction which the world of today is following. So I think it's interesting that the French thinker Jacques Ellul, in his book The Technological Society, this is the English translation, it's interesting that Jacques Ellul talks about this atomization of human beings, the quantitative differentiation of human beings, the condition which Guénon speaks of, where they are mere individuals and nothing more, the atomization that Guénon speaks of. So in this book, The Technological Society, on pages 370 to 371, he's talking about the application of propaganda techniques in modern societies. Now you have to remember that Ellul wrote this book a long time ago. This is 1964, the English translation. But it was originally published in French in 1954, 10 years earlier, by Libraire Armand Collin, I think, as La Technique au l'enjeu de Cicel, or whatever, how you pronounce that. French pronunciation is terrible. The point is that the book originally came out in 1954. The English translation is 1964. So it's all the more striking, his observation. So he's talking about the application of propaganda techniques, mind you, in 1954. Original publication date of this book. And how the application of propaganda techniques leads to a kind of manipulatability of the masses. So he writes that propaganda technique has for its object the production and cultivation among the masses of certain predispositions, and a special facility for doing at any given moment whatever is strategically opportune. As political circumstances change, it is necessary at intervals to cultivate successive predispositions. I'm sure people who are viewing this video are intelligent enough to provide their own examples, so we won't do that. He continues, this is a remarkable notion. The use of certain propaganda techniques is not meant to entail immediate and definitive adhesion to a given formula, but rather to bring about a kind of long-range vacuity of the individual. In other words, the person becomes reduced to an atomized individual,
Empty.
a merely quantified, so it's just a collectivity, uniformity as opposed to unity. The individual, his soul massaged, empty of his natural tendencies, and thoroughly assimilated to the group, uniformity, not unity, is ready for anything. I mean, it can be manipulated to do anything. Propaganda's chief requirement is not so much to be rational, well-grounded, and powerful, as it is to produce individuals especially open to suggestion, who can be easily set into motion. This is an extremely interesting book. And he has another book exactly devoted to propaganda called Propaganda, the Cultivation, the Formation, of Men's Attitudes. So Ellul is also a kind of diagnostician, I would say, of the Kali Yuga, albeit quite different from René Guénon, but still very interesting and worth reading about, So a lot of things which Guénon just sort of suggests or certain possibilities that he's pointing to but never really spells out. That's an example of these possibilities being spelled out. Genon just says that that this tendency lies in the direction which the world of today is following. So we'll just conclude here. It says, a mere glance at things as they are is enough to make it clear that the aim is everywhere to reduce everything to uniformity, whether it be human beings themselves or the things among which they live. And it is obvious that such a result can only be obtained by suppressing, as far as possible, every qualitative distinction. But it is particularly to be noted that some people, through a strange delusion, are all too willing to mistake this uniformization for a unification, whereas it is really exactly the opposite. So the whole point of this is that everything that proceeds from matter produces nothing but antagonism and multiplicity, differentiation. So just to sum up, the true principle of individuation in species, which really should be formed, but the scholastic philosophers, in his view, are mistaken when they take materia secunda to be the principle of individuation. And indeed, that takes us in the direction of quantity, and that's what the modern mentality does. He says this is another instance of the errors of the modern world, and this leads into the homogenization, we could say, the uniformization, the kind of uniformitarianism, if we may coin that term, that is characteristic of the modern world, in which everyone is processed through a certain kind of propaganda, and propaganda of that kind, I would say, even includes education, which you can take as a kind of indoctrination, the whole sort of dumbing down, which we have in the modern world. All of that is part of this of uniformity against unity. And that's why the more uniformity that you have, the more homogenization, the more vacuity that is engineered by and indoctrination in people, the more actual disunity and discord that you have, and the more antagonisms that you will have in society. And this is again part of the downward flow, the whole entropy, so to speak, the increasing disorder of the Kali Yuga.
But to bring in a modern example, this is really what I think a lot of this has become known to people in what they call identity politics.
Identity politics,
This whole idea of looking at people and races and identities as merely a collective.
Yeah.
Which Genon says turns them into nothing but a quantitative multiplicity.
Yeah.
But you would think that if you attempt to put identities and races into a what they try to do is a unity, but really is a uniformity, you would think you'd get a lot of very nice relations between everybody. But what harmony, yes. What actually happens,
true unity,
is exactly what actually happens is antagonism, like he says. And this I think this conception of uniformity really explains why there can really be no sense of class solidarity or community solidarity, like many Marxists I see online talking about, for example.
Marxism. Well, Marxism really is a critique, after all. So they're
it's purely a critique.
Constantly critiquing everybody.
But they don't really say that. What they attempt to do is to kind of foster some kind of solidarity amongst classes, but it can never really exist according to Genon, because that is all just quantitative multiplicity.
Yeah. All right, so I think that sums up this chapter.
Yeah.
Is there anything else to add?
I'm not sure. Put your thoughts in the comments below. Yeah,
put your thoughts in the comments below. I do think that if you just keep in mind these fundamental ideas of the logic of Aristotle, classical logic, and the 5 predicables, then it's a lot clearer what it is he's trying to talk about. So as I've said before, I think Genon demands a lot of his readers, and again, he's not troubled by that. So either you bring yourself up to that level and do the necessary background, and if you don't, then this text will remain a closed book to you.
And anyone who hasn't done logic, I suggest look at our logic reading list video.
Absolutely right. Yeah. So if you haven't,
put that in the description.
If you're just hearing this for the first time, then I do have a full logic reading list video. You should refer to that. I'll mention a lot of really great books there. Right. So I think we'll just conclude here. Thank you for watching. Do like and subscribe and share the video, and we'll see you in the next lecture, Chapter 7.